South Africa's state-owned power utility says it is extending stage 6 load shedding indefinitely after the company suffered 11 breakdowns at its power stations. Saddled with creaking coal-fired power stations and a mountain of debts, Eskom has struggled for years to meet electricity demand in Africa's most industrialized country. But that wasn't always the case. Eskom was once one of the world's leading electricity companies. It was so successful that it was supplying more than half the electricity in Africa by the end of 1990. Fast forward to now. Load shedding has hit the highest level ever, stage 6, and could hit stage 7 in 2023. The record power cuts have led to public frustration and crippled businesses. To look at what's bedeviling Eskom, I have Dr. Dale McKinley, independent political and economic analyst, and Ghaleb Cachalia, Shadow Minister of Public Enterprises, both joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to The Square.
Thank you.
So let's start with a bit of a trip in history. Eskom was once a highly efficient electricity producer. In its 1994 annual report, it promoted the fact that it was actually the world's lowest cost producer of electricity. But everything seems to have gone downhill from there. Dale, let me start with you. How has it gone downhill? What actually has happened to Eskom?
Well, a number of things have happened. The first thing that is important to note is that since 1994, a large section of the South African population that previously did not have access to electricity now has access. So it's not like you can compare apples and pears. In 1994, what you had was a energy utility that was predominantly servicing the white economy and a very small minority of the population. So that's the first thing. And that was a positive thing in the 1990s as electricity was rolled out to those in the rural areas and those in settlements and townships which had never had access. However, alongside that came the bad, which was misgovernance, corruption, lack of planning, putting people who did not know what they were doing, running the show. And this over 20 years has resulted, 25 years, has resulted in a massive crisis. So there's a multifaceted crisis at Eskom, which revolves around leadership, which revolves around the politicians and the ruling party, corruption and mismanagement, a lack of forward planning, a lack of engagement of renewable energy, and increasingly working with the private sector to bring on extra energy. So those are the fundamentals of this crisis. It did not have to be this way, and it still can be rescued, but given the political class that is in control at the moment, things do not look very good at this stage.
Ghaleb, let me come to you. So at this point, it's almost safe to say that Eskom's issues are historic, and Dale mentions leadership. So let's look at that. Many of South Africans probably at this point don't remember a time without some level of blackouts. And this is also happening as Eskom's CEO has resigned. His exit makes it about 13 CEOs, interim CEOs, and acting CEOs that the company has had between 2007 and about 2023. And these are CEOs that have been appointed by the government. So in terms of the government and Eskom's issues, what does this tell us about the ability of the government, whether it's this administration or the next, because government is a continuum, to fix Eskom's issues? Is there the political will to make a difference in this situation?
Well, let's get this straight first. I agree with what Dr. McKinley has said, his latter part particularly. The former part where he said access was extended in 1994, absolutely yes. But the government was advised, and the government knew, the ANC government, that it had to increase generative capacity at the time. It chose not to. What it did was it ran the plants like as if you're running a car without servicing it for many years. Of course, it breaks down then. And then you add all the malfeasance and the graft and the state capture into it, and you have this ridiculous situation we find ourselves in. So I put the blame squarely, historically and presently, at the ANC's feet. They are responsible for this. They have brought this to bear, and they seem to be unable to fix it. It is fixable, but they do not want to take the measures to fix it. What they've recently put on the table is a decision to move it into the Ministry of Energy, the utility, and that we'll move it. The Minister of Energy is known as Old King Coal. He has got no time for renewables. He's got no time for privatization. He doesn't want to unbundle Eskom. He won't improve the transmission network. So we must brace ourselves for an almost blackout. This is a parlous state of affairs which has got worse over time. The present president was responsible for over 10 years. Eskom was on his desk. The minister, Pravin Gordhan, has frankly failed. And now we're passing it to Gwede Mantashe to fail again. What a nightmare.
And so I'm happy you bring up the minister and, of course, the president, because right now what we're seeing in the media is a lot of back and forth about who's responsible for Eskom's failures and how Eskom can get out of what the mess it is right now. So South Africa's finance minister has criticized the operational performance of Eskom and says the energy minister needs to act urgently. The foreign minister says the breakdowns could be seen as an attack on the country. So it's a whole lot of rhetoric, a whole lot of statements, but not a lot of doing. So Dale, let me come to you because Ghaleb mentions, of course, the conversation around renewables. The president is in support of unbundling Eskom into 3 units, transmission, generation, and distribution. But as he said, the energy minister, his statements don't support that. There's also, of course, the generation capacity, having some of the municipalities do that as well as private individuals. What does the solution look like? Let's leave aside the political rhetoric. In all honesty, what is the solution to Eskom's failures looking like? Combining all of these things together or what?
Well, of course, at this stage, there are no particular easy answers. We can't just click our hands and it's going to be solved. But I think there are certain things that can be done and can be done now. The first thing is to root out the bad apples within Eskom and to get rid of the incompetence, to get rid of those people that have simply just taken Eskom for a ride. There are those that are sabotaging because their tenders and their contracts are being protected. Those need to seriously clamp down, prosecute, and make prosecutions of those people. That's the first thing. The second thing is maintenance. Do the basic maintenance on what can be done and prioritize it. The maintenance schedule, as Ghaleb has mentioned, has been put on the back burner for 20 years. And this is something that can be done so we can prioritize those places and those facilities that can be fixed. And the third thing, of course, is to speed up completely the renewable programs, bringing on independent power producers. There's extra capacity that can be brought onto the grid fairly quickly. This needs to be moved very quickly, the red tape taken out of the question, and that it's not going to be immediate, but it can certainly be in the next year, 6 to 12 months. We could see a substantial reduction in the deficit. And of course, the big question, of course, is management and leadership, which is going to be a longer term challenge. But putting in place, Cyril Ramaphosa has just received another vote from his party to be the leader. He now sits in the seat. He has to do something. If he doesn't, he's going to be remembered as the president who never acted on anything. Not just the Eskom, but a whole range of different things. And it's up to him now to try on the political side to make the necessary decisions, get rid of the people that are the incompetents and those that are not doing their job, and push this. We're not going to see major improvements in the next, I'm sure, several weeks or months. But I think by the end of the year, if these things are done, we could be at least in a much better situation going forward.
And that, unfortunately, is a big if. I've covered Eskom's issues extensively on the business show right here on News Central. And one thing that Eskom has completely always asked for is more money. Eskom has repeatedly said that the dire state of its aging coal fleet means that breakdowns will increase and that maintenance cannot be postponed. The government has, however, dragged its feet to install additional generation capacity. So Eskom has about a 400 billion rand debt. That's around $23 to $24 billion. And as we heard late last year, the government is thinking of taking on a level of that debt to sort of ease things for Eskom. Ghaleb, let me come to you. This is also a money conversation. It's an economic conversation because Eskom's failures also are linking now to the economic challenges that South Africa has. In terms of the money budgeted, the money spent, the bailouts given, the debt that the National Treasury may take on because of Eskom, is this a mistake? At this point in time, should we just unbundle everything and turn everything completely private?
We need to go down the privatization route, but we also need to keep the lights on in the short term. Otherwise, we have a crash here, which will crush this economy in uncertain terms. What we have said for many years, and many people have agreed with us, is that what needs to be done is to declare a state of disaster around Eskom, a ring-fence state of disaster with an independent panel of experts overseeing it, and allowing it to be underpinned by the National Security Act and the National Key Points Act, to allow the executives in charge to do their job, to come up with plans, immediately implementable plans, to say, this is what we need to be done, this is when we need to do it by, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how much it's going to cost. Then you take those to the money bags. You go to Treasury and you go to the private sector and you say, these are our plans, they're utterly implementable. Can you stand behind these plans with money? That is the way to do it. At the same time, what it allows you to do is have unfettered access for the executives to clean the impediments in Eskom up. So you can deal with ridiculous impediments like localization issues, like cadre deployment, like black economic empowerment, which all have dragged it down at the moment. Push all that to the side. You can deal with that in the future. The imperative now is to get the lights on and keep them on. And this can be done if you accept that there is a crisis and you move forward in the direction that we and I have just enunciated. But it doesn't meet with government's approval. Their heads are firmly in the sand. And they're in the sand because political shenanigans and deals are afoot that has kept Cyril Ramaphosa and given him a second bite of the cherry in terms of his term in office. There's nothing like a free lunch in South Africa or anywhere else in the world. So now there's payback. And the payback, despite all the things he says, sits in Gwede Mantashe and his cabal's lap, where he will now call the shots as regards electricity. And that is going to be dire.
And that was the next question I wanted to ask you, Ghaleb, and I was going to say with you in terms of the proposal from the ANC, a policy proposal moving the Eskom to the Energy Ministry, and you said giving your opinion on that. So, Dale, I want to quickly come to you on that. Do you think the movements will do anything at all? There is this policy that the ANC is looking at in terms of the meetings after, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa survived that, the farm gates possible impeachment, but now some policy proposals put forth, and one of them is moving Eskom to the Energy Ministry. Does a movement get to any way in terms of solving the issues that Eskom has?
No, of course not. It's ministerial musical chairs, and it's avoiding the problem. Where I would disagree with Ghaleb is that I don't think wholesale privatization is necessarily the answer. What the South African history of Eskom shows is that, and our continent shows, is that when a parastatal is run efficiently, when it's managed properly, when a political party which is in power is honest and straightforward, you can have an efficient public entity providing basic services. This is what you can do. The problem in South Africa as well is not just our country, but the problem, of course, is that when the private sector comes to dominate, the cost goes up for those that can't afford it. And we have to deal with that because it won't help us if we have a lot of electricity, but increasing numbers of people cannot afford to access that electricity. Then you've got another political problem and another socioeconomic problem. So it's a combination of different factors. But the answer is not shifting from one public enterprises to Department of Minerals and Energy. What we have outlined, I think, and we're in broad agreement here, is that you have to deal with the immediate crises and the immediate things that are happening. And that's about maintenance. That's about getting rid of the corruption. That's about basically bringing on renewables and creating a policy certainty for those who are not only outside our country, but others, not just in the private sector, but in civil society, to be able to have confidence in a parastatal and also to be able to see that things are improving. We need to see it on the ground. We don't need more rhetoric. We don't need more promises. We've had enough of that. People are very angry and very desperate now, not just business people, but ordinary folks as well. There are people in townships who are sitting with no electricity for 18 hours out of 24 hours a day. This is now as bad as Zimbabwe in Harare, where we're sitting in the dark the whole time. It's impossible to work. It's impossible to be productive. So something has got to give. And if the government doesn't do it, I'm afraid that what's going to happen is that South Africans are going to then have to make some hard political choices. And I would like to see, and I think I'm not certainly the only one, that in the 2024 elections, a fundamental political shift to happen, because the African National Congress, which has been in power since 1994, has fundamentally failed its electorate and this country when it comes to basic service delivery, no more so than electricity.
So my final question goes to both of you. On December 12th, I believe it was, Eskom released its annual financial audit. There were more than 2,009 hours of load shedding during 2022, much more than 2021, which itself was an increase from 2020. If we follow the trend, South Africans should probably brace for more darkness ahead. And we know that the darkness in South Africa has cost the economy anywhere from upwards of 20 or 40 something billion rand, depending on who you ask and who's doing, of course, the equating. But in the long run, what do we think the consequences are for South Africa if it does not solve this Eskom issue, particularly in this year, 2023, ahead of the elections? Ghaleb, let me start with you.
The consequences are absolutely dire. If the pumping heart of the economy, which is Eskom, fails, and the spine of the economy, which is Transnet, fails, which is about to happen, then the country comes to a halt economically, because you cannot do business within and you cannot do business without those two factors. No one has mentioned the fact that today, just a couple of hours ago, NERSA, the regulatory authority, approved a 32% hike in the tariff. Now, that affects poor people hugely. The fact of the matter is, you need to have an assessment of Eskom. There are 15 plants and one nuclear plant. You have to say, which can we run within Eskom satisfactorily over a period of time, and which must we begin to mothball and maybe cannibalize what they have to fix other plants. Then you need the renewables to kick in, and in parallel, and you need the private sector to, in a competitive scenario, compete. And then the nature of the market is prices will be dealt with by the market, and it will and they will level out in that respect. Now, that has never happened. The fact of the matter is that under normal circumstances anywhere in the world, if the private sector fails, the public sector moves in. Here, the public sector has failed. There is not one particular unit in our utility or entity in the 400 odd or 700 odd private public entities that we have, which is actually running successfully, apart from maybe something like the government information system and statistics system. So how can we talk about not letting the private sector come in, but allowing it to compete against the public sector in a transparent and scaled down fashion? We have two brand new coal plants. No one's suggesting throw them out of the window. With too much money spent there. Fix those, yes, and let them run. And see what the levelized cost is against the others coming in. And that's how the world should operate. So should South Africa.
All right, Dale, very quickly because of time, the question to you also, what are the consequences for South Africa if it doesn't solve this Eskom issue, especially in 2023?
The consequences are an economic, I wouldn't say meltdown, but certainly I think we're going to, if you look at our growth rates, for example, projected over the next 2 years, they're anemic, less than just over 1%. I think we could go into negative territory. What that means is increased poverty. It means increased inequality. It means lack of investment. It means people losing their jobs. Basically, what we have seen in our northern neighbor, what's happened in Zimbabwe, what's happened in several other countries, not just in our continent, but otherwise, when the political class essentially becomes a vampire state. In other words, they suck everything dry in the economy, and they don't really care about the people. We see what happens, and it's a downward spiral. I am fairly optimistic, even if the short-term view is not particularly a good one, but that the South African people, the civil society, the organizations, are going to we're going to turn this around. I think it's going to take a while. I don't think it's going to be just a doom and gloom scenario, but I think in the short term, there's going to be a lot of pain, and there's going to be a lot of struggle to get back to a situation where basic services become the norm as opposed to a privilege.
All right, so we'll have to leave it at that because of time. Dale and Ghaleb, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. I don't know how much light you have. The earlier guest I spoke to on the business show told us as soon as the interview was over, he knew that he was going to be in darkness for the next few hours. So we do hope that South Africa sees its way through this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.